Fireside Tailes for Wolfgang, Episode 33. Originally broadcast on GWC Productions' YouTube channel, Caps Media Television Channel 6 in Ventura, on KPPQ LP Ventura at 104.1 FM, and on the KPPQ Podcast Network. Episodes can also be viewed on Pasadena Media, either on Spectrum Charter Channel 32 or on AT&T Uverse Channel 99. Greetings and salutations. And we will start by lighting this candle. I found a quote from Einstein. I was actually looking for another quote that I'll read a little later in the show. Einstein lost a very close friend of his, I think mere weeks before Einstein also passed. They both knew, it seems, that they were both on their way out. And but I'll come back to that. One thing that Einstein said while on his way out, and this this really encapsulated Wolfgang's exit. Einstein said, "I want to go when I want. It is tasteless to prolong life artificially. I have done my share. It is time to go. I will do it elegantly." I won't go into a lot of detail. I think the only detail I'm going to get into in this regard here is that he passed on Friday afternoon, about 3:30 in the afternoon. We were out here on the balcony. Sun was shining. We were surrounded by birds. It was an extremely peaceful final hour. It was the most relaxed and comfortable I had seen him look in a week. And of all the creatures that I've ever seen pass, human and non-human alike, I think he passed with such grace and dignity. You may recognize this poem, or at least you may recognize one line out of this poem. There's one line in this poem that was specifically used in the Dead Poets Society. This poem is called "O Me, O Life" by Walt Whitman. O me, O life, of the questions of these recurring, of the endless trains of the faithless, of cities filled with the foolish, of myself forever reproaching myself for who more foolish than I, and who more faithless, of eyes that vainly crave the light, of the objects mean, of the struggle ever renewed, of the poor results of all the plodding and sordid crowds I see around me, of the empty and useless years of the rest, with the rest me intertwined. Question. Oh me, so sad and recurring, what good amid these? Oh me, oh life. Answer. That you are here, that life exists, and identity, that the powerful play goes on, and you may contribute a verse. Here's a quote from one of my favorite physicists, intellectual heroes, Richard Feynman. It is one of the most remarkable things that in all of the biological sciences, there is no clue as to the necessity of death. If you say we want to make perpetual motion, we've discovered enough laws as we studied physics to see that it is either absolutely impossible or else the laws are wrong. But there's nothing in biology yet found that indicates the inevitability of death. This suggests to me that it is not at all inevitable and that it is only a matter of time before the biologists discover what it is that is causing us all the trouble, and that this terrible universal disease or temporariness of the human's body will be cured. Another scientist, Michael Anisimov, said, "Involuntary death is a cornerstone of biological evolution, but that fact does not make it a good thing." Carl Sagan said, "Far better, it seems to me, in our vulnerability is to look death in the eye and to be grateful every day for the brief but magnificent opportunity that life provides." If Wolfgang could have been said to have a philosophy, I'd say he's a classic Greek and then Roman Stoic. Everything was just very matter-of-fact and extremely practical. And he wouldn't be overtaken by all the silly emotional sentimentality that I am so prey to. Okay, here's a light-hearted story with a heavy-sounding name by Saki. This is called Fate, by H. Munro, publishing under the pen name Saki. Rex Dillett was nearly 24, almost good-looking and quite penniless. His mother was supposed to make him some sort of an allowance out of what her creditors allowed her, and Rex occasionally strayed into the ranks of those who earned fitful salaries as secretaries or companions to people who were unable to cope unaided with their correspondence or their leisure. For a few months, he had been assistant editor and business manager of a paper devoted to fancy mice, but the devotion had been all on one side, and the paper disappeared with a certain abruptness from club reading rooms and other haunts where it had made a gratuitous appearance. Still, Rex lived with some air of comfort and well-being, as one can live if one is born with a genius for that sort of thing, and a kindly providence usually arranged that his weekend invitations coincided with the dates on which his one white dinner waistcoat was in a laundry-returned condition of dazzlingly cleanness. One more sidebar. Damn, did Wolfgang go out with dignity. He never stopped grooming. He never let himself appear disheveled or in any way unbecoming. What a beast. Rex played most games badly and was shrewd enough to recognize the fact, but He had developed a marvelously accurate judgment in estimating the play and chances of other people, whether in a golf match, billiard handicap, or croquet tournament. By dint of parading his opinion and of such and such a person's superiority with his own degree of youthful assertiveness, he usually succeeded in provoking a wager at liberal odds, and he looked to his weekend winnings to carry him through the financial embarrassments of his midweek existence. The trouble was, as he confided to Clovis Sangrel, that he never had enough available or even prospective cash at his command to enable him to fix the wager at a figure really worth winning. "Someday," he said, "I shall come across a really safe thing, a bet that simply cannot go astray, and then I shall put it up for all I'm worth, or rather for a good deal more than I'm worth if you sold me up to the last button." "Well, it would be awkward if it didn't happen to come off," said Clovis. "It would be more than awkward," said Rex. "It would be a tragedy. All the same, it would be extremely amusing to bring it off. Fancy awakening in the morning with about £300 standing to one's credit. I should go out and clear out my hostess's pigeon loft before breakfast out of sheer good temper." "Your hostess of the moment mightn't not have a pigeon loft," said Clovis. "I always choose hostesses that have," said Rex. "A pigeon loft is indicative of a careless, extravagant, genial disposition such as I like to see around me. People who strew money on activities for a lot of feathered inanities that just sit about cooing and giving each other the glad eye in a Louis Quatorze manner are pretty certain to do you well." That's Louis XIV, the Sun King of France. Talk about a party guy. "Young Strinett is coming down this afternoon," said Clovis reflectively. "I dare say you wouldn't find it difficult to get him to back himself at billiards. He plays a pretty useful game, but he's not quite as good as he fancies he is." "I know one member of the party who can walk around him," said Rex softly, an alert look coming into his eyes. "That cadaverous-looking major who arrived last night. I've seen him play at St. Moritz. If I could get Strinett to lay odds on himself against the major, the money would be safe in my pocket. This looks like the good thing I've been watching and praying for." "Don't be rash," counseled Clovis. "Strinett may play up to his self-imagined form once in a blue moon." "I intend to be rash," said Rex quietly, and the look on his face corroborated his words. "Are you all going to flock to the billiard room?" asked Theresa Thunderfold after dinner, with an air of some disapproval and a good deal of annoyance. "I cannot see what particular amusement you find in watching two men prodding little ivory balls about on a table." "Oh, well," said her hostess, "it's a way of passing the time, you know." "Well, a very poor way to my mind," said Mrs. Thunderfold. "Now, I was going to have shown you all the photographs I took in Venice last summer." "You showed them to us last night," said Mrs. Quavering, Teresa's hostess. "Those were the ones I took in Florence. These are quite a different lot." "Oh, well, sometime tomorrow we can look at them. You can leave them down in the drawing room, and then everyone can have a look." "Well, I should prefer to show them to you now, while you're all gathered together, as I have quite a lot of explanatory remarks to make about Venetian art and architecture, on the same lines as my remarks last night on the Florentine galleries. Also, there are some verses of mine that I should like to read to you on the rebuilding of the Campanile. But, of course, if you all prefer to watch Major Latin and Mr. Strinett knocking balls about on a table, they're supposed to both be quite first-rate players," said the hostess. "I have yet to learn that my verses and my art quoiserie are of second-rate quality," said Mrs. Teresa, thunderful with acerbity. "However, as you all seem bent on watching a silly game, there's no more to be said. I shall go upstairs and finish some writing. Later on, perhaps I will come down and join you." To one, at least, of the onlookers, the game was anything but silly. It was absorbing, exciting, exasperating, nerve-stretching, and finally, it grew to be tragic. The Major, with the St. Moritz reputation, was playing a long way below his form. Young Strinett was playing slightly above his, and had all the luck of the game as well. From the very start, the balls seemed possessed by a demon of contrariness. They trundled about complacently for one player, they would go nowhere for the other. "Right, 170 against 74, sang out the youth who was marking the score. In a game of 250 up, it was an enormous lead to hold. Clovis watched the flush of excitement die away from Dillett's face, and a hard white look take its place. "How much have you got on?" whispered Clovis. The other whispered a sum through dry, shaking lips. It was more than he or anyone connected with him could pay. He had done what he said he would do. He had been rash. "Right, 206 versus 98. Rex heard a clock strike 10 somewhere in the hall, then another somewhere else, and another, and another. The house just seemed full of striking clocks. Then, in the distance, the stable clock chimed in. In another hour, they would all be striking 11, and he would be listening to them as a disgraced outcast, unable to pay, even in part, the wager he had challenged. 218 versus 103. The game was as good as over. Rex was as good as done for. He longed desperately for the ceiling to fall in, for the house to catch fire, for anything to happen that would put an end to that horrible rolling to and fro of red and white ivory that was jostling him nearer and nearer to his doom. 228 versus 107. Again, they're only playing to 250. Rex opened his cigarette case. It was empty. That at least gave him a pretext to slip away from the room for the purpose of refilling it. He would spare himself the drawn-out torture of watching that hopeless game played out to the bitter end. He backed away from the circle of absorbed watchers and made his way up a short stairway to a long, silent corridor of bedrooms, each with a guest's name written in a little square on the door. In the hush that reigned in this part of the house, he could still hear the hateful click, click of the billiard balls. If he waited for a few minutes longer, he would hear the little outbreak of clapping and buzz of congratulation that would hail Strinett's victory. On the alert tension of his nerves, there broke another sound. The aggressive, wrath-inducing breathing of one who sleeps in heavy after-dinner slumber. The sound came from a room just at his elbow. The card on the door bore the announcement name, Mrs. Bundleford. The door was just slightly ajar. Rex pushed it open an inch or two more and looked in. The impressive Mrs. Teresa had fallen asleep over an illustrated guide to Florentine art galleries at her side. Somewhat dangerously near the edge of a table was a reading lamp. If fate had been decently kind to him, thought Rex bitterly, that flaming oil lamp would have been knocked over by the sleeper and would have given them something to think of besides billiard matches. There are occasions when one must take one's fate in one's hands. Rex took the lamp in his. 237 versus 115. Strinnett was at the table, and the balls lay in good position for him. He had a choice of two fairly easy shots, a choice which he was never to decide. A sudden hurricane of shrieks and a rush of stumbling feet sent everyone flocking to the door. The Dillet boy crashed into the room, carrying in his arms the vociferous and somewhat disheveled Teresa Thunderfold. Her clothing was certainly not a mass of flames, as the more excitable members of the party afterwards declared, but the edge of her skirt and part of the table cover in which she had been hastily wrapped were alight in a flickering, half-hearted manner. Rex flung his struggling burden on the billiard table, and for one breathless minute, the work of beating out the sparks with rugs and cushions and playing on them with soda water siphons engrossed the energy of the entire company.
"It was lucky I was passing when it happened," panted Rex. "Someone had better see to the room. I think the carpet is alight."
As a matter of fact, the promptitude and energy of the rescuer had prevented any great damage being done, either to the victim or her surroundings. The billiard table had suffered the most and had to be laid up for repairs. Perhaps it was not the best place to have chosen for the scene of salvage operations, but then, as Clovis remarked, when one is rushing about with a blazing woman in one's arms, one can't stop to think out exactly where one is going to put her. Einstein had a friend named Michel. They worked in Bern, Switzerland together. They were both patent clerks. And they were so close. They were so close that Einstein said, "When I see your handwriting, I rejoice in a very special way, for no one is as close to me. No one knows me as well. No one is as well intentioned as you are." They were just the closest of buddies, the way Wolfgang and I were. They happened to die within weeks of each other. And when Michel Bessot passed, Einstein knew he was also on his way out. And this next little excerpt is something Einstein wrote to his friend Michel's family upon Michel's passing. What I admired most in him as a man is the fact of having been capable of living so many years with one wife, not only in peace but also in constant accord. Now he's gone, slightly ahead of me again, leaving this strange world. That doesn't mean anything. For us believing physicists, this separation between past, present, and future has the value of mere illusion. However, tenacious that illusion is. So what he was getting at was, you and I will experience others' deaths as a natural course of our lives. Those others' experiences will stop from our perspective. But to ask where we go after we die is kind of like asking where were we before we were born. There's a quirk about time that I'm not convinced is necessarily the case. In the same way that you and I can sit on a chair or can put our feet on a floor and we experience that as a solid object. What we know from basic physics, from basic atomic theory, is that these objects that we experience as solid are mostly empty space. Now, because of how we perceive, this is what Einstein was referring to as the tenacious illusion. There are some perceptions that we will never be able to step outside of. Walls will always seem solid. Time will always seem linear. That's not a limitation of the universe. That is how we have evolved to experience these things. Ontologically speaking, this is the branch of philosophy that deals with existence. From a standpoint of existence, I'm not convinced that now, this very moment, is more real or more existing than any moment of the past of your life, or is any more real than any moment that your life has not brought you to experience yet. Here's where I reiterate. Other people will cease to exist for you. You will, when someone dies, you will be cut off from interacting with them as an agent. In the same way that the children that you have not conceived yet, or other people's children that other people have not conceived yet, that you will be close to in the future, those are not people that you miss because those are not people that you've even met yet. However, there is a moment in the future that is just as real as right now, where you exist with them. I'm not convinced that afterlife really makes sense as a question, because I'm not convinced that your perception from your first memories as a toddler to your last experiences, hopefully as a geriatric, I'm not convinced that that continuation of perception ever actually stops for you. That you I'm not convinced that you don't experience something of the reality of this in perpetuity. If that was at all too vague, I invite people to ask me about that sort of thing in person, or perhaps private message. But again, I say in reflection that the floor that you stand on is not solid, but that's the only way that you will ever experience it. And time in the universe is not linear, but that's the only way that you will ever experience it. And eventually, people will experience their own linear time that does not include you. Carl Sagan. The nitrogen in our DNA, the calcium in our teeth, the iron in our blood, the carbon in our apple pies were made in the interiors of collapsing stars. We are made of star stuff. We owe our existence to stars because they make the atoms of which we are formed. So if you're a romantic, you can say, we are literally star stuff. One of the reasons biological evolution is a great intellectual passion of mine personally is that we already know from physics, as Carl Sagan so poetically and informatively put it, we are inextricably part of the universe that we find ourselves in. There's no rationalizing around that. Some religious points of view rob themselves of this grandiose notion by thinking that the world was created for us. But objectively, that doesn't seem to be the case. Objectively, we are another physical process of the universe. So as I started to say, one of my favorite things about biological evolution is that it shows us that we are inextricably part of nature. Humans are absolutely necessarily a part of biology. We are necessarily part of the Earth. The Earth is inextricably part of the solar system. The solar system is inextricably part of the Milky Way galaxy, which is part of the universe. Again, back to Carl Sagan, the cosmos is within us. We are made of star stuff. We are a way for the universe to know itself. I've always said, I don't think that we were made with a purpose. I think that we exist and you get to choose that purpose. And if you choose that your purpose is to enjoy and appreciate the universe, that is wonderfully noble. And good on you. Do that. If that's what feels right to you, you are not wrong. The hair-splitting point is that I don't think it's necessarily the case. I think you get to choose it.
By Louisa May Alcott. The story is called Anna's Whim. Now, just look at that, cried a young lady, pausing suddenly in her restless march to and fro on one of the wide piazzas of a seaside hotel. "Eh, what?" asked her companion, lazily swinging in a hammock. "The difference in those two greetings. It's perfectly disgraceful," was the petulant reply. "I didn't see anything." "Do tell me about it," said Clara, opening her drowsy eyes with sudden interest. "Why, young Barlow was coming up the walk and met pretty Miss Ellery. Off went his hat. He gave her a fine bow, a gracious smile, a worn-out compliment, and then dawdled on again. The next minute, Joe King came along. Instantly, Barlow woke up, laughed out like a pleased boy, gave him a hearty grip of the hand, a cordial, 'How are you, old fella? I'm glad to see you,' and linking arms, the two tramped off, quite beaming with satisfaction." "But, child, Joe King is Barlow's best friend. Kitty Ellery is only an acquaintance. Besides, it wouldn't do to greet a woman the way you would greet a man." "Yes, it would. Especially in this case. Barlow adores Kate and might at least treat her to something better than the same nonsense greeting that he gives the other girls. But no, it's proper to simper and compliment, and he'll do it till his love gets the better of him. Then he'll be sincere and earnest." "Well now, honey, isn't this a new whim of yours? You surely wouldn't like to have any man call out, 'How are you, Anna?' then slap you on the shoulder and nearly shake your hand off," said Clara, laughing at her friend. "Oh, yes, I would," answered Anna, perversely, "if he really meant it to express affection or pleasure. A good grip of the hand and a plain, hearty word would please me infinitely better than all the servile bowing and sweet nonsense I've had lately. I don't want to be a goddess stuck up on a pedestal. I want to be a woman, to help and be helped by our acquaintance." "It wouldn't do, I fancy. They wouldn't like it and would tell you to keep to your own sex." "But my own sex never interest nor help me out one bit. Women have no hope but to be married, the sooner the better, with no ideas but proper clothing and appearances, and I'm tired to death of both. They have no ambition but to outshine their neighbors, and I despise that." "Well, thank you, love," sarcastically murmured Clara. "It's true, and you know it. There are sensible women, but not in my set. I've tried the life set down for girls like me, and now I'm tired of it. I want something better. Men will follow, admire, and flatter me. They enjoy my society very well. Then it's fair that I should say I enjoy theirs, but it's perfectly maddening to have flocks of bright fellas round me, yet not be able to enjoy it because society ordains twaddle between us." "Well, what shall we do about it, love?" asked Clara, enjoying her friend's tirade. "You, Clara, will submit to it and get a mental dyspepsia like all the other fashionable girls. I won't submit. I just won't." Anna walked in silence for a moment, then burst out again more energetically than ever. "Oh, I do wish I could find one sensible man who would treat me as he treats his male friends, one who would think me worthy of his confidence, ask my advice, be my friend in all good faith." "Aha!" replied Clara with a laugh that angered Anna. "You need not try to abash me with your jeers. I know what I want. I will not marry till I know the man thoroughly. I want to prove to him and to myself that I possess brains and a heart, as well as the heavenly eyes and a queenly figure and a mouth made for kissing. The scorn with which Anna uttered the last words amused her friend immensely, for the petulant beauty had never looked lovelier than at that very moment. If any man saw you now, he'd promise whatever you ask, no matter how absurd. But don't excite yourself, dear child. It is way too warm for heroics. Anna leaned on the wide baluster a moment, looking thoughtfully out upon the open sea. As she gazed, a new expression stole over her charming face, changing its disdainful warmth to soft regret. This is not all a whim. I know what I covet because I had it once, she said with a sigh. I had a boyfriend when I was a girl, and for several years, we was like brother and sister. What happy times we had together, Frank and I. Frank, we played and studied, quarreled and made up. We dreamed splendid dreams and loved one another in our simple child fashion, never thinking of follies that spoil mature friendships. What became of him? Asked Clara. He went to college. I went abroad to be finished off. And when we met a year ago, the old charm was all gone. For we were in society, and we had our masks on. Point of order, this is mid-1800s, so having their masks on was purely metaphorical. So, the boy and girl friendship did not ripen into love and end the romance properly? No, thank heaven. No flirtation spoiled the pretty story. Frank was too wise, and I was too busy. Yet, I remember how happy I was to see him. Though I hid it properly, and pretended to be quite unconscious that I was anything but a belle. However, I got paid for my deceit. In spite of his admiration, I saw he was disappointed in me. I should not have cared if I had been disappointed in him, but I was quick to see that he was growing into one of the strong, superior men who command respect. I wanted to keep his good regard at last, but I seemed to have nothing but beauty to give in return. I think I was never so hurt in my life as I was by his not coming to see me after a week or two, and hearing him say to a friend one night, when I thought I was at my very best, I heard him say, "She's spoiled like all the rest." I do believe you loved him, and that is why you won't love anyone else, cried Clara. No, said Anna, with a quiet shake of the head. No, I only wanted my boyfriend back. I just couldn't find him. The fence between us was too high, and I could not climb over as I used to when I leapt the garden wall to sit in a tree and help Frank with his lessons. Has the uncivil wretch never come back? Asked Clara, interested in the affair. Never. He's too busy successfully shaping his life to waste his time on a frivolous butterfly like Anna West. An eloquent little gesture of humility made the words almost pathetic. Kind-hearted Clara was touched by the sight of tears in the heavenly eyes, and tumbling out of the hammock, she embraced the queenly figure and warmly pressed the lips that were made for kissing, thereby driving several approaching gentlemen to the verge of distraction. Don't be tragical, darling. You have nothing to cry for, I'm sure. Young, lovely, rich, and adored. What more can any one girl want? Said Clara, gushingly. Something besides admiration to live for, answered Anna, adding with a shrug as she saw several hats fly off and several manly countenances beam upon her. Never mind. My fit is over now. Let us go and dress for tea. On the morning after her fit, she was up and out unusually early, for she had kept her room with a headache all the evening, and now longed for fresh air and exercise. Miss Anna West usually took a brisk pull in her own boat before breakfast. This habit lured many young gentlemen out of their beds at unaccustomed hours in the hope that they might have the honor of helping her boat start off, or the privilege of wishing her bon voyage, or better yet, the crowning rapture of accompanying her. As she prepared her little rowboat, called the Gull, for a start, she was idly wondering what early bird would appear eager to secure that coveted worm, when a loud and cheerful voice was heard calling, "Hello, Anna," and a nautically attired gentleman hove into sight, waving his hat as he hailed her. She started at the unceremonious salute and looked back. Then her whole face brightened beautifully as she sprang up the bank, saying with a pretty mixture of hesitation and pleasure, "Why, Frank, is that you?" "Do you doubt it?" The newcomer shook both of her hands so vigorously that she winced a little as she said, laughing, No, I don't. That is the old squeeze with extra power in it." "How are you? Going for a pull? Take me along and show me the lions. There's a good soul." "Well, with pleasure. When did you come?" asked Anna, settling the black ribbon with which set off her white throat charmingly.
"Last night. I caught a glimpse of you at tea, but you were surrounded then and vanished immediately afterwards, so when I saw you skipping over the rocks just now, I gave chase, and here I am. Shall I take an oar?" asked Frank as she motioned him to get in.
"No, thank you. I prefer to row myself and don't need any help," she answered with an imperious little wave of the hand, for she was glad to show him she could do something besides dance, dress, and flirt.
"All right, then. I'll be luxurious and enjoy myself." And without offering to help her in, Frank seated himself, folded his arms, stretched out his long legs, and placidly remarked, "Pull away, skipper." Anna was pleased with his greeting, and feeling as if old times had come again, she prepared to astonish him with her skill. "Might I suggest that you—" began Frank as she pushed off.
"No suggestions or advice allowed aboard this ship. I know what I'm about, although I am a woman," was the severe answer as the boat glided off from the wharf.
"Aye, aye, sir."
And Frank meekly subsided, with a twinkle of amusement in the eyes that rested approvingly on the slender figure in a blue boating suit and the charming face under the sailor hat. Anna paddled her way dexterously out from among the fleet of boats. Then she seated herself, adjusted one oar, and looked about for the other rowlock. It was nowhere visible, and after a silent search, she deigned to ask, "Have you seen the thing anywhere?"
"Well, actually, yeah. I saw it back on the bank."
"Well, why didn't you tell me before?"
"I began to, but I was quenched, so I obeyed the orders."
"You haven't forgotten how to tease," said Anna petulantly.
"Nor you to be willful."
She gave him a look that would have desolated most men, but only made Frank smile affably as she paddled laboriously back, recovered the rowlock, and then, with a fine display of muscle, she pulled out to sea. Soon, she let the boat drift and forgot time and space in the conversation that followed. "What have you been doing since I saw you last?" she asked, looking as rosy as a milkmaid, and tied up her wind-tossed hair. "Well, working like a beaver, you see." And then, to her utter amazement, Frank entered into an elaborate statement of his affairs, quite as if she understood all about it and her opinion was valuable. It was all Greek to Anna, but she was immensely gratified, for it was just the way this boy used to tell her his small concerns in the days when each had firm faith in the other's wisdom. She tried to look as if she understood all about investments, percentage, and long credit, but she was out of her depth within 5 minutes and dared say nothing. She got out of the scrape by cleverly turning the conversation to old times, and soon youthful reminiscences absorbed them both. The faint, far-off sound of a gong recalled her to the fact that breakfast was nearly ready, and she was dismayed to see how far they had floated. She stopped talking and rowed her best, but wind and tide were against her, and her stalwart passenger made her task doubly hard. He offered no help, however, but merely leaned back and dabbled his hands in the water. Pride kept Anna silent until her face was scarlet. Her palms blistered, her breath most gone. Then, and not till then, did she condescend to say, with a gasp which was poorly concealed by an amiable smile, "Do you care to row? I ought to have asked you before." "I'm very comfortable, thank you," answered Frank. Then, as an expression of despair flitted over Anna's poor face, he added bluntly, "I am getting desperately hungry, so I don't care if I do shorten the voyage a bit." With a sigh of relief, she rose to change seats, and, expecting him to help her, she involuntarily put out her hands as she passed, but Frank was busy turning back his cuffs and never stirred a finger, so that she would have lost her balance and gone overboard if she had not caught his arm. "What's the matter, skipper?" he asked, standing the sudden grip as steadily as a mast. "Why didn't you help me? You have no more manners than a turtle," cried Anna, dropping into the seat with the frown of a spoiled beauty who is accustomed to being gallantly served and supported at every step in her mortal life. Frank only added to his offense by laughing as he said carelessly, "You seemed so independent. I didn't care to interfere." "So, if I had gone overboard, you would not have fished me out unless I asked you to do it, I suppose?" "Well, in that case, I'm afraid I shouldn't have waited for your orders. We can't spare you to the merman just yet." I know, rude turtles. It made me grin, too. Something in the look he gave her appeased Anna's resentment, and she sat silently admiring the strong, swift strokes that sent the gull skimming over the water. "Not too late for breakfast after all," she said graciously as they reached the wharf where several early strollers stood watching their approach. "Poor thing, you look as if you needed it," answered Frank, but he let her get out alone, to the horror of Messrs. Barlow, King, and Company, And while she fastened the boat, Frank stood settling his hatband with the most exasperating unconsciousness of his duty. "What are you going to do with yourself this morning?" she asked, as she walked up the rocky path with no arm to lean upon. "Fish. Will you come along?" "No, thank you. One gets so burned. I shall go to my hammock under the pine," was the graciously suggestive reply of the lady who liked a man to fan or swing her and seldom lacked several to choose from. "Well, see you at dinner then. My room is in the cottage, so farewell for the present." And with a nod, Frank strolled away, leaving the lovely Miss West to mount the steps and cross the hall unescorted. "The dear fellow's manners need polish. I must take him in hand, I see. And yet, he's very nice in spite of his brusque ways," thought Anna indulgently. And more than once that morning she heard him call, "Hello, Anna," as she swung languidly in her hammock with a devoted gentleman softly reading Tennyson to her inattentive ears. At dinner, Anna appeared in unusual spirits and kept her end of the table in a ripple of merriment by her witty and satirical sallies, but she was privately hoping that her childhood sweetheart would discover that she could actually speak well whenever she chose to do so. But Frank was deep in politics, discussing some new measure with such earnestness and eloquence that he seemed not to take any notice of Anna. She was listening with silent interest when Frank suddenly appealed to her to confirm a statement he had just made. Embarrassed, she confessed she knew too little about the matter to give any opinion whatsoever. Anna went in search of her friends, looking unusually bright and beautiful. Clara appeared first, and since Frank had already been introduced to her and she professed herself perfectly fascinated, such a personable man, quite distinguished, and so elegant in his manners, devoted, graceful, and altogether just charming. Oh, you like his manners, do you?" And Anna smiled at Clara's enthusiasm. "You are so fastidious. Nothing ever suits you, dear. I didn't expect you to like this old friend of yours, but I confess I do. Immensely. So, if you are tired of him, I'll take him off your hands." "Ah, well, thank you. You are welcome to poor Frank, if you can win him." Anna spoke sweetly, but at heart was ill-pleased with Clara's admiration of her private property, as she considered poor Frank to be, and inwardly resolved to have no poaching on her preserves. Tune in next time for the continuation of Anna's Whim. Thank you for joining us for this episode of Fireside Tales for Wolfgang. To view more of my work, check out my YouTube channel at Hunter's Acoustic Cabin. Directed by Hunter Ackerman. Produced by GWC Productions. The show is dedicated to the memory of my best friend, Wolfgang Beastly. Originally broadcast on GWC Productions' YouTube channel, Caps Media Television Channel 6 in Ventura, on KPPQ LP Ventura at 104.1 FM, and on the KPPQ Podcast Network. Episodes can also be viewed on Pasadena Media,